All right, welcome everyone. Gather around, gather around. Don't be shy. We're going to get started in just a few moments here on this beautiful snowy Toronto day or wherever you're tuning in from. I'm looking outside my window and it's nice and chilly. I'm glad to be inside here, about to sip some fantastic Roero wines, Bianco and Rosso. Hopefully you were able to find a couple of bottles yourself to taste along with us as we get into some of the details of this region. We're going to get rolling in just a moment. We have Francesca Daldi here from the Consorzio Tutela Roero. It's going to give us a little welcome in just a moment. Buongiorno Francesca, come stai?
Buongiorno John, tutto bene, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us here, taking some time out of your day to share with Torontonians, Canadians, something about this beautiful region.
It's a pleasure to be here with you. So let me just make a short introduction about the consortium and why we are here today. This is the beginning of a campaign that is called Sip and Savor, and it's aimed to promote European produce among US and Canada. So Roero is a consortium that was established in 2014, but Roero is also a territory with the soul, a landscape where history, agriculture, and culture interact in a really powerful way. So the aim of the consortium is to promote and protect the Roero DOCG, which is one of the few wines in the world that can be both red and white. Red is based on Nebbiolo grapes, and the white is Roero Arneis, which is based with the Arneis grape. And today we represent a production of more than 8 million bottles on an area of more than 1.3 hectares, which is quite huge. We have over 250 producers among wine growers and winemakers. And also a really important thing to us is the biodiversity within our landscape, as Roero can be also considered an orchard. This is one of the main features why in 2014 we were also recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So if you want to stop by and have a visit about the terroir that you will see, and John is about to tell you a little more about, just please come visit us, have a sip of Roero, and maybe pair it with some amazing charcuterie, which is the one represented by IVSI, which is the Istituto Valorizzazione Salumi Italiani, that was established in 1985. So this year is celebrating the 40th anniversary. The aim of the consortium is the promotion of the European charcuterie, a focus on the Italian one, which can be both cooked and raw. This is one of the main things that Italy has to offer you. This is why you will discover also a little bit more about the presentation. So thank you for your time. I'll leave the place to John, and I hope you will enjoy this time together.
Grazie mille, Francesca. Don't go away in case we have any detailed questions that I can't answer. We'll bring you back on at the end.
Of course, I will turn off my camera and my microphone,
Bene,
but I will be
grazie.
here.
All right, welcome back, everyone. My name is John Szabo. I'm one of the principal critics at winealign.com. For the last 15 years or so, we've been covering as many of the wines as we can that come into Canada, but also outside the country. And Italy is one of the countries that I spend certainly the most time in outside of Canada. I go 2 or 3 times a year, sometimes 5 or 6, like this year, including, of course, Piemonte, where I was most recently this past spring and spent a little time in Roero getting to know this wonderful region in a little bit more detail because, well, I know a lot of students out there, you know that Nebbiolo and Arneis are two critically important grapes in Piedmont. For me, Nebbiolo is one of the great red grapes of Italy, which means one of the great red varieties of the world. Certainly in my top handful of grapes that I drink a lot of and have quite a lot of in my cellar. And Arneis, hopefully you've had the chance to taste that. I'll give you some more details on that in a moment, but in a very short period of time, it has become one of Italy's most important white varieties. So I'm going to take you through the region, a little bit of history, a little bit of details. I know there are some students out there studying for your MS or your MW or your WSET or whatever it is. We'll give you all the details. Francesca already spilt some of the information, but we'll bring up some slides so you can take your notes if you wish, or just sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Let's give you a little bit of flavor for this wonderful part of the world. Just to situate ourselves here, we are in northern Italy, northwestern Italy, in the region of Piemonte. And you can see we're up there. Milano is about an hour and a half drive, depending on how fast you go, or Torino. Those are your two main points of entry if you're visiting the Langhe area. And Roero, Alba is one of the principal towns, along with Asti. And since we're talking a little bit about salumi today, I have to point out that Bra, BRA, is actually the epicenter of the slow food movement. That's where the slow food headquarters is located, and there's also a slow wine division nowadays. But talking about fantastic place to go eat, I tell you what, Bra is probably one of the top destinations in this country, which is, of course, famous for its fantastic gastronomy, not only wines. This is a place you want to be. So as Francesca just invited us all, I say, let's take her up on that and let's take a little visit. Roero, look at this fabulously beautiful region. Those who've been there know that, well, in Milan, it's all about fashion and ties and black dresses and everything else. When you get to the Roero, this is laid back territory. This is nobody's dressed in their Sunday best for the most part. This is a wild and pretty untouched area. If we were to compare it, for example, to Barolo Barbaresco, just on the other side of the Tanaro River, there it's a blanket of vine, 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 everywhere vine. When you cross the river to the north into Roero, you are looking at orchards, you're looking at forests, you're looking at vineyards, but not only. It's an area of terrific diversity. You'll see chestnut and hazelnut trees, strawberries, apricots, plums. I mean, it's a pretty magical place to grow so many different things, not just grapes, but of course also grapes. It's a land of diversity. We'll see radically steep hills. We'll see soft and gentle hills. We'll see different exposures, aspects, elevations. So when it comes to growing grapes, there is an absolute myriad of different possibilities. And we'll talk a little bit about that diversity, which is a strength and a weakness. Of course, we talk about diversity can sometimes be a little confusing for consumers, but I'll point out that at the end of the day, we're dealing with two main varieties, one red, one white, Nebbiolo and Arneis, and looking at nuances rather than radical differences. Producer matters, of course, soil matters, exposure aspect. All of these things will give a slightly different twist, a different nuance, but essentially we are in the same camp of style. It's also an area of terrific biodiversity. And today, this is one of the things that comes up over and over again in conversations I have with grape growers, winemakers around the world. The importance of biodiversity has now finally been recognized, because when you have biodiversity, you have balance in a natural environment. Monoculture of any kind, whether it's grapes or strawberries or almonds, is generally not good for the environment. You have one pathogen that arrives in one corner of your plot of land and it quickly spreads throughout the entire region. There's nothing to stop it. But imagine a landscape like we see here, of trees, of orchards, of vineyards, of incredible diversity. There's something like 1,100 different species of trees and shrubs and flowers and plants in this area. There are, in vineyards alone, over 30 different types of wild spontaneous herbs that grow. There are butterflies, 34 different species recorded in just this small little corner of Piemonte, if you can believe that. Bees, which are incredibly important for pollinating not just grapes, but everything else. Some 30 million bees have been estimated in the area with from some 600 hives that are used for commercial purposes. So biodiversity, diversity, these are two critical elements. Here's an example, a photograph of a vineyard where you can see vines, but also look in the middle there, you can see there are peach trees growing. This is part of a new understanding of growing. It's often referred to as regenerative agriculture and or agroforestry. These are strategies whereby you put back more into the land than you take away. It's a true form of sustainability, and for me, it's the gold standard. Organic is great, biodynamic is also great, but for me, these days, regenerative farming with a little bit of agroforestry thrown in there. That's planting trees in the perimeter vineyards and in many cases in the same row or completely mixed in, really makes for a better balanced environment. You see disease pressure reduced. You see higher quality grapes with less inputs, to put it quite simply. It's also an area of cultural diversity. There are 19 towns that are incorporated in the Roero DOCG district. And it's fun to see in most Italian towns, you'll see castles and bell towers, but 14 out of the 19 towns in Roero have wonderful towers and or castles. This is Canale. This is one of the important towns. You could call it the center of wine culture in Roero. It's where the Enoteca Regionale, the local regional office to go and taste wines and see, taste a whole lot in one small little area. Castagnito, Castellinaldo, you can see a wonderful castle there. Santo Stefano Roero. And as Francesca mentioned off the top, the area of Langhe, Roero, and Monferrato, in fact, were all classified as World Heritage Sites. And what does that mean? Well, actually, I'm going to read to you the criteria for inclusion when they were given this status. It goes, the cultural landscape of the vineyards provide outstanding living testimony to wine growing and winemaking traditions that stem from a long history and that have been continuously improved and adapted up to the present day. They bear witness to an extremely comprehensive social, rural, and urban realm and to sustainable economic structures. They include a multitude of harmonious built elements that bear witness to the history and its professional practices, wine growing included, of course. And finally, the vineyards constitute an outstanding example of human beings interacting with their natural environment. The wine growing landscape also expresses great aesthetic qualities, making it into an archetype of European vineyards. So there you have it. That was the reason that the Roero and Langhe and Monferrato Hills were included as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Italy, a country that has quite a few of those. All right, shall we proceed? Let's get into some of the details of the appellation itself. You can see these are the wine growing regions called the Langhe appellations. So again, we are in Piedmont, Piemonte, literally at the foot of the hills. And from anywhere on the map, if you were standing, you could look to the north and you would see the Alps right across the top with their perennial snow-covered caps. Even in the summertime, they form a pretty dramatic backdrop to most of the vineyards here. So the area that we're going to look at specifically is, of course, Roero. This is the part here. You can see Canale as that important town in the northern part of the appellation. But the whole area here in pink is DOC Langhe. So the Roero DOCG falls into that. It's a sub-region, if you will, of the Langhe area. To the south, we have perhaps, I will say, better known appellations of Barolo and Barbaresco, also famous for Nebbiolo grapes. Roero, although the history is long, I'll share that in a moment, has really come into its own in, I would say, the last 30 years, 20 years, perhaps. And that is due, I think, in large measure to the success that Roero Arneis, white Roero, has had, really captured the world by storm. And success has been built on the back of that. And you Nebbiolo fans out there will certainly want to get into Roero and start to dissect the nuances, the different expressions of Nebbiolo, because they are quite different from what you'll find in most of Barolo and most of Barbaresco wines of tremendous finesse. More on that in a moment. I love topographic maps because when it comes to growing grapes, exposure elevation aspect are everything. And as we know, most of the time, the best places to grow grapes are up off the plains, the flats, which tends to be a little bit more waterlogged, a little bit more fertile, great for growing other crops and fruits and vegetables and so on. But for top quality grapes, for the most part, you want to be in the hillsides, better drainage, better sun exposure. And you can see that there's the town of Bra I mentioned earlier, Santo Stefano Roero. We saw a photo of that up to Monta. There's Canale. So this is the Roero area, and main growing regions, grain subregions are right along these various ridges here, and in some of the other slightly elevated areas, like around Vezza d'Alba and Guarene. Geology. I know you students out there love a good bit of rock talk, and let me give you 6 million years to 60,000 years ago in about 60 seconds, if we can do that. Did you know? Actually, I didn't know this until I started diving into the geology of Piemonte and Roero, that about 6 million years ago, the Straits of Gibraltar closed. You know, the straits are not that far between southern Spain and North Africa, but at one point they closed off, and the entire Mediterranean went through this period of very, very low water levels to almost completely dry, created salt pans, as you can see there in that photograph on the left, completely altered the landscape of southern Europe as we know it, changed the flows of rivers. The Rhone, for example, that's when it had to cut deeply through the northern part in order to get down to then much lower Mediterranean basin. So in sum, completely changed the face of Europe as we knew it then. But then it finally reopened about 5.3 or so million years ago, and that allowed the Atlantic to flood back in and to create the Mediterranean basin, such as it is today. But interesting to note, those of you who have been swimming in the Mediterranean know that it is quite a lot saltier than the North Atlantic because of this period of desiccation when all the salt crystallized into these little salt flats, salt pans. So at that point, about 5 million years or so ago, all of northern Italy, or at least the majority of it, was a sea, was a big basin, was almost a tropical ocean, all the way from Friuli and through Suave, Veneto into Piedmont was underwater. So that explains, in large measure, why the vast majority of soil types that you see across the stretch of northern Italy are sedimentary soils with varying degrees of limestone, shell creatures like you see in the middle photograph there, that disintegrate and create calcium carbonate, which is, as we know, pretty important nutrient, pretty important mineral element for grapevines. They tend to like that quite a lot. So for about 2.5 million years, this area submerged, bottom of a sea, accumulating sediment. And at that point, the African tectonic plate slides into the European plate. And as we know, when you get tectonic plates meeting, you end up building mountains and very often volcanoes. But at this point, the Alps were pushed up and the entire area of Piedmont and Roero lifted out of the sea. The sea drains away eventually, exposing various layers of sediments that had accumulated over those several millions of years. And the Tanaro, I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment, but let's have a look at what happened when Straits of Gibraltar reopened. The different soil formations, you can see they all neatly layer down according to a geological era. So the oldest ones are these so-called marls of Sant'Agata fossils, moving on up to the sands of Astis, and that's what's called the Complesso di Villafranca. Not going to bore you with too many of those details here, but just imagine those layers of sediment like a cake getting scrunched up, you get the exposure of different geological eras, epochs, coming straight to the surface. And interestingly enough, some of the newest soils get often buried at the bottom of the stack, and some of the older soils come up to the top. So if you imagine the hillside, you can see that you could have marls of Sant'Agata in one layer, you could have sands of Asti, you could have other conglomerates, you have all these different formations that are exposed. So that explains why there's such a diversity of soil in this area. It's all a sea bottom at one point, but as it tilted up, we get the exposure of these different layers, which for a grape grower is fabulous because that means you've got different opportunities to express a different side of Nebbiolo or Arneis in this instance. All right, so this is what the soil, the simplified soil map of Roero looks like. I'll point out just a couple of interesting things to know. This little strip of green and brown stuff here, this is those famous marls of Sant'Agata, which are actually quite similar to what you see on the other side. Here's the Tanaro River running through here. On the other side of the river in Barolo, and to a lesser extent in Barbaresco. So these are very marly soils. Marl is simply a sort of dirty limestone, if you will, clay and lime mixed together, and it makes for pretty sturdy Nebbiolo. Lot of tannin, a lot of structure, such as you find over, say, in Castiglione on the other side of the river. But the most important thing that you need to remember for the wines of Roero is this central area here. Now, this blue bit, these are sandy marls, and then the sands of Asti, the brown bits here, and the red bits. So this is the principal growing area that we're looking. Those marls of Sant'Agata form a tiny percentage of the overall acreage planted, but we're talking about variations on sand, sandstone, a little bit more lime, a little bit less lime, a little bit more clay, a little bit less clay, but at the end of the day, all sedimentary, sandy soils. And what does that mean for wine? Well, grab yourself a glass of Roero Rosso, made from Nebbiolo or Arneis. And for me, it gives wines of tremendous finesse. Not without structure, certainly has quite a lot of structure, but for the most part, softer tannins, rounder, smoother, wonderfully perfumed wines. And this is something I see all over the world. If we were to compare apples with apples, different soil types, the sandier soils versus the heavier clay soils, clay is more water retentive and tends to be cooler. Therefore, wines with higher acid and a little bit more bite, a little bit more tannic grip, whereas those from sand, these free draining, fast warming soils, tend to produce looser knit tannins. I find a little bit silkier, a little bit smoother, if you will. But you taste and you be the judge. So these are what you'll find various various shell creatures throughout all of the vineyards of Roero. There are even some parts in the lower area where you see, in fact, entire giant marine creatures, the bones of whales and dolphins and so on, not just small little shellfish like this. All right, I mentioned the River Tanaro, an important feature of this area, and you can see by this progression of schematic diagrams how, the 250,000 years or so ago, Roero and the Langley was one plain. There was no division, but because of this tectonic action, and more importantly, because of the effect of rivers, and they tend to carve themselves a nice, easy path to wherever they're going to enter a larger body of water, the sea in this case, started to eat through that soft, sedimentary, sandy soil. It's a lot easier to carve through that than it is, solid granite or basalt or whatever it might be, solid rock. The river is able to carve through that. And over time, the course of the river changed. And this is what it looks like today. So that's Roero to the north of the Tanaro, the left bank, as they call it, and the Langhe Hills, Barolo Barbaresco on the south side. And that carving of these soft soils resulted in pretty amazing landscape. And this is why you need to go to Roero to see it for yourself, because there's this phenomenon called le rocche, the rocks, which are these amazing steep areas of the former course of the Tanaro River that got carved. And you got these amazing, pretty much sandstone columns. They're like giant brownish mushrooms sticking out of the ground. And you wonder how on earth would that sort of geological formation have occurred? And well, now you have your answer. It's just water eroding away this soft material. And I mean, it's sort of like the Grand Canyon, if you will, of Piedmont, an amazing area to go hiking, walking. There's a lovely little trail that runs the entire set. The Le Roque, this curve pretty much cuts the appellation in half. It runs from almost the town of Bra up to Monta, that town I showed you right at the top. So sort of southwest to northeast, cuts right through, and you can take a little walk through that area, and you can enjoy some of the biodiversity, and enjoy yourself. This just gives you a little bit of flavor for the region. Probably the best place to see Le Roque is in the town here of Pocapaglia, where the chasm, the canyon, the gorge is at its widest, and you can do a nice little walk down right through this canyon, and you'll see Mediterranean pines. You'll see all sorts of different trees and shrubs and so on. All right, a couple of the details for you here. As Francesca already mentioned off the top, and I've got the numbers in front of you. The appellation itself is 1,340 hectares as of most recent count, with about three-quarters of that planted to Arneis and another 350 or so planted to Nebbiolo. So about 75, 25% white to red split. You can see bottle production there, 7.6 million bottles of Arneis Roero and 750,000 of Roero Rosso. So you're more likely to find a bottle of Arneis, and I know we have quite a few in the Canadian market here. It's pretty much a staple, if not at the LCBO, at least in importers' portfolios. I see quite a lot of them on wine lists around the city here. So it's a variety with some recognition, I would think, even at the consumer level. And the Consorzio protects and celebrates the 260 associates producers at the moment. Other important date maybe to remember, 2004 is when Roero got its G, the garantita part of Denominazione di Origine Controllata, which of course means stricter production regulations and also a tasting panel. That's what the garantita means. It means that somebody tasted it and said, this is worthy of the stamp. This is just to show you a little bit the progression of the appellation over the past decade. You can see that Rosso started out pretty small, just 10 years or so ago, under 200 hectares. Now it hasn't quite doubled, but almost there at 355, whereas Arneis from 800 has ticked up to just under 1,000. Other varieties planted in the area, of course, you'll find Barbera, as you do all over Piemonte. Favorita goes into obscure grape varieties. We'll be interested to know. It's not so obscure. It's actually Vermentino from Liguria and Sardinia, but here in Piemonte, they call it Favorita. Remember, this is Italy. They've got a different name for everything, not just in Italy, but in almost every region. Because let's not forget, Italy as a country, as we know it today, has only existed for about 150, 170 years. Now, before that, it was a collection of city-states and kingdoms, and completely split. That's why you'll see such diversity in language, diversity in cuisine, diversity in wines, of course. All right, climate. I threw this sort of misty, cloudy, rainy Roero day up there for you, just to point out that it's actually considered a semi-arid continental climate, really quite dry, I have to say, overall. And you couple that with sandy, free-draining soils, and you have a very low humidity environment to grow grapes in. Irrigation, obviously, not permitted. At least not not legally, but this is a factor that reduces yields considerably when you've got low humidity in the soil, not a lot of access to water. That means bunches stay pretty small, pretty tight, pretty compact, and yields overall are quite low. All right, now get your pens and papers out. 134 MGAs were made official in 2017. What is an MGA? It's in Italian, menzione geografiche aggiuntive, and an added geographical designation or mention, if you will. And this is a big theme throughout all of Italy, and it was done some years ago in Barolo and Barbaresco. It is essentially a crew or a small subzone, a small region with distinct, unique characteristics, with some historical significance, a name that would be recognized, at least locally, and which gives rise to a wine of some unique or singular characteristic. So those of you sitting across the ocean here in Canada, looking at this small region in northern Italy that's already not terribly well known, or at least not yet, now considering 134 different single vineyards or single names that could appear on bottles of wine might seem a little excessive, but remember, in the world of wine, we celebrate diversity, so we celebrate uniqueness and singularity. And this is the producer's way of communicating with the customer that there's something special about this wine. Whether you know what those characteristics are, you know that it was worth creating a specific MGA for, and therefore the wines are going to be, to a degree, at least more interesting. Not always better. I mean, better is a very problematic and slippery word. It means different things to different people. What I like is not necessarily what you'll like, and vice versa. But uniqueness and also consistency of character. So a couple of the main things to keep in mind. I mean, vines already have to be there. You couldn't select a little plot in your woods and create an MGA there. It has to have existed as a vineyard prior to that. Has to be at least 10 hectares. So these are not tiny little areas by any means, actually relatively substantial. And they can't be owned by one single grower, so no monopoles here. These are shared geographic indications, just like the UGAs in Chianti Classico, or the UGAs in Soave, or the MGAs in Barolo Barbaresco. As I said, many regions now across Italy have gone into this sort of level of detail, which is great. Gives us exam setters and those of us still studying wine more to learn. Valley floor also excluded. As I mentioned, these are hillside vineyards. All right, and just to delve in, here are the MGAs around the town of Canale. So we are in the northeast sector, and I'll just point out a couple. I've got some nice photos to show you: Ciriano and Renesio. So these areas, actually, Canale as a town is one of the most important in terms of acres planted, but also for some of the most famous MGAs. If you're going to know a couple of names, you might want to put it in the back of your notebooks there: Renesio, Ciriano. Give you a couple of others to look at. And here's the Ciriano MGA. One thing about soils and visiting an area, and this is something I learned from a guy called Alessandro Masnaghetti. He's known as the map man of not just Italy, but predominantly he's drawn maps for many of the appellations, including Roero. When you're in a region, read the landscape and you'll know a lot about the soils. For example, heavier clays, marly soils, they erode much more slowly and tend to produce hillsides that are round and gentle, whereas those sands, those much looser, more friable soils, they erode much more quickly, and you tend to get very steep, sharp angles. So even just biking through Roero, you'd be able to tell, okay, that's more of a sandy vineyard. Therefore, I would expect this style of Roero, Rosso or Bianco, or it's a heavier clay soil. I would expect maybe a little bit more acid, a little bit more structure. Here's Renesio, which is pretty well known MGA for both Nebbiolo and Arneis. You can see a little more sandy soils there. You get these cuts in the soil. You can see the sand right there, but a more steep slope as opposed to the gentle clay type vineyard that you'd see in the background there. Other well-known MGAs, point out this one here, Chabot San Giorgio. Chabot, by the way, is a Piemontese dialect word that means little hut or somewhere you would keep your vineyard equipment, your hoe or whatever, right out in the vineyard. And then you can see the MGA, and there's the Chabot right there, right at the top of the hill, which is often called Bric in Piedmontese dialect again, Bric or Sori, the sunny part, right, the best exposed part at the top or the side of a hill. And maybe the best one, actually, the first Roero Rosso I ever tasted was from this MGA here, Valmaggiore, which is an absolutely spectacular amphitheater of beautifully steep sandy soils that makes a Rosso of incredible finesse, incredible perfume. And there's the Valmaggiore MGA there. And that is the soil. There's a bit of sandstone, you can see it easily crumbles with some shells included in there, and amazingly refined and elegant styles of wine. Trinità, Valmezzana. Again, you're not going to remember all of these names, but slowly we'll go learning and understanding some of the differences between these vineyards. It's a lifetime's pursuit, but again, the homework's not that bad. All right, Arneis. Important variety, interesting backstory. It's fun to learn that back in the 60s, this variety had all but disappeared. There were literally a couple of rows here and there in the region. It was on the verge of becoming extinct until a couple of producers found it, revived it, repropagated it. Giovanni Negro in the Roero area was one of those producers, kind of instrumental in bringing Arneis back from near extinction. Plenty of historical records referring to the variety. In fact, the name derives from Renesium, which got changed to Ornesium, and then eventually Arneis. And that vineyard I just showed you there, the MGA called Renesio, is thought to be, could be, I mean, I can't confirm this nor deny it, but the birthplace of Arneis. It's a good story. And yeah, so that's back into the late 1400s, early 1500s. Mid 1700s, it was already considered pretty high quality grape, right up there with Moscato, which, as we know from the Asti area, a very important variety in Piedmont for mainly sparkling wines, but not only. And at the time, Arneis was made as a sweet wine for the most part, or vermouth. Piedmont has a terrific tradition of vermouth making, especially in the town of Torino, where l'ora di vermouth is a ritual. Every day at 5 o'clock, the whole city stops and pops into one of the great old traditional cafes and has a little vermouth aperitivo. I think it's a great idea, but not made from Arneis so much these days. It's too expensive a grape and makes too good old white wines to turn into vermouth. And then, as I mentioned, in last century, almost disappeared. It kind of survived because it was interplanted with Nebbiolo back in the day, and it was in fact called the white Nebbiolo, and that was because it ripens earlier than Nebbiolo, which, as we know, is a very late ripening variety, but it would attract the birds. It was kind of a decoy variety, if you think of it that way. It was interplanted in amongst the Nebbiolo, so that when birds would come, hungry and thirsty in the latter part of the season into September, they would eat the Arneis and leave the Nebbiolo. But of course, all of that has changed now, and some of the first dedicated vineyards planted exclusively to Arneis started to appear in the 70s, and the wine was turned into dry wine for the first time, and eventually became the wine we know today. DOCG regulations. So, I mean, in practical terms, 100% Arneis. You can throw in 5% Favorita or Chardonnay or Sauvignon if you want, but for all intents and purposes, Roero Arneis is in fact 100% Arneis. It does come in sparkling versions. And a new kind of interesting category. I don't have a lot of experience with this yet, but in 2017, they introduced a Riserva version of Arneis. And as the story went, producers, never really thought of this as a variety to age. It was made in a fresh, fruity, reductive style, usually consumed within the first 6 months or a year, until with some history now of producing good quality dry white Arneis. Some bottles invariably get tucked in the cellar and forgotten about, and producers started to pull out these old bottles after 3, 4, 5 years and realized, my goodness, it actually ages much better than we expected it to, and it becomes really something very, very interesting. So completely different style after several years in bottle, but worthy and well worth checking out. I don't have any in my glass today, but I've got a 2023 Arneis. It's not an MGA, it's not a single area, it's a composite of the area, and for me, it's a pretty classic example of the variety in the non-Riserva style. So, I mean, all stainless steel. In this case, I would call it a semi-aromatic variety. It's not Moscato-like in its intensity or Gewürztraminer, but it's certainly a lot more floral, a lot more fragrant than Chardonnay, to give you a little point of reference there. Very floral, has this amazing kind of apple blossom chamomile, white flowers, white spring flower profile, and then fruit that ranges from, I call it white fleshed orchard fruit, that is peach, white peach, a little bit of apricot in there sometimes, and citrus, but more on the riper side of citrus. As a variety, it tends to be on the lower acid side. So don't expect Riesling type acids here, a little softer, a little rounder and gentle. In fact, it's a tough variety to pick the right harvest time because it can go from perfectly ripe to overripe in a matter of a day or two. So harvest time is really critical in the case of Arneis. You want to preserve those aromas and certainly the acids, but you don't want to harvest too early either, because then you don't develop those beautiful aromatics. I have to say this is a pretty spot on example. You'll see often a little bit of residual carbon dioxide, not spumante and not even frizzante, but often producers will leave just a little bit of CO2 in the wine to give it a little freshness, to give it that almost imperceptible spritz that just freshens it up, makes it more lively. Does anyone have Arneis in their glass? If you do, drop it in the chat. Share with your friends there. And by the way, I should have mentioned off the top, any questions, any important questions you'd like me to answer, put in the Q&A. Any other comments or things you want to share with the crowd or the Consorzio who are there in the background, put those into the chat. This is just a little recap of the development of Arneis, what's being made today between regular Arneis Annata, maybe we call it, and the Riserva versions. You can see that in 2017, when the MGAs were introduced, obviously early days, just a tiny percent of Roero Arneis were made with an MGA designation. And still, to this day, not too many. 2.68, less than 3% are MGA designated. You'll see much more of that on the Riserva side. You can see today, or at least 2023, almost 47%, almost 1 out of every 2 bottles of Arneis Riserva produced is with a MGA designation. So much more likely to see that on a bottle of Riserva. All right, let's move on over to Nebbiolo. Does Nebbiolo need actually an introduction? I'm sure you've all had multiple examples, at least I hope you have, in your wine drinking careers. As I mentioned off the top, for me, it's one of the finest red varieties. It is just, I don't know, you can't find it anywhere else. I mean, there are some varieties that have similar range of flavors, but the range that you get from Nebbiolo is so unique. It's so particular to this grape. You've read the textbooks, the rose perfume, very, very floral, but also very earthy. Tar is another one that frequently comes up. Whole range of red fruit, tart red fruit, sometimes riper red fruit. And the other notable thing about the grape, of course, is its pale color. Very, very low pigment variety, but don't let that fool you, because beneath that, there's a lot of acid and a lot of tannin. So wines with immense structure that historically were aged for years in some cases in large vats in order to soften those tannins, given very, very long maceration periods so that you can, well, you're never going to gain color. In fact, you lose color when you macerate for 3 months or 2 months. But you start to polymerize, you start to soften those tannins up with a little bit of time and exposure to oxygen. In the region, I mean, the history is a long one. Mentions going back to the 1300s when a certain Guglielmo Baiamondo was mentioning una carata di vino moscatello, which means a cartload, literally, of Muscat wine, and another of buono puro vino Nebbiolo. So good, pure Nebbiolo, already recognized as a distinct variety. 700 odd years or so ago. Again, dry versions of Nebbiolo, as we know them today, are relatively recent. Back in the mid 1700s, I would say, right up until almost the 1800s. I mean, we could look back into the history books and see exactly when the development of dry red wine making occurred in Piedmont and Italy in general. It was around 1850, 1860, so relatively recent. Before that, Nebbiolo came in sweet versions, very frequently dolce, as you can see there in the middle slide. Amabile, one of my favorite Italian words, which means kind of semi-sweet. Amabile means lovable, soft, round, cuddly, not fully sweet, but certainly not dry and austere and angular. Amabile. And there were secco versions and vecchio versions, old wines. I guess you would have paid a premium for a vecchio version. Hopefully it was still good. And late 1700s, mention already of Brente di Arneis, casks of Arneis, plus Vino Negro. And Vino Negro, I mean, as a separate category, and Nebbiolo, kind of deformation of the word we know today, Nebbiolo. And you know where that comes from, at least according to the legend, and I like it. It's a late ripening variety, and you arrive in Piedmont in October sometime. Very frequently, you're bathed in fog in the early mornings. You get out of your hotel room or your Airbnb, and you're in this thick fog. And this is about the time when you're out harvesting Nebbiolo. So it's the grape you harvest in the fog, in the nebbia. Nebbia is Italian for fog. I know. You buy that story? I like that story. DOCG regulations. So again, for practical purposes, pure Nebbiolo here. We could throw in a little bit of Barbera, I suppose, but every producer I know in Roero is pure Nebbiolo. And there's some minimum aging requirements, as is frequently the case for regular Roero, 16 months, which 6 has to be in wood, but could be big wood, doesn't have to be small wood. And the Riserva category, given a little bit more time, almost double, 36 months total, but still the same minimum 6 months. So it doesn't have to have necessarily more wood aging, although, again, in practical terms, very frequently it has more time in barrel. I've actually got 2 here because it's almost noon, right? I've got a regular Roero Rosso and an MGA, a specific MGA. Actually, that's from the Renesio vineyard that I showed you earlier. Just so we could do a little compare and contrast. The regular version, as I've been saying all along, a very soft, very pretty style of wine, but with deceptive structure there. There's still Nebbiolo at the end of the day. There's plenty of tannin and no shortage of acidity. So these wines aren't going to go over the hill anytime soon. You'll get several years out of them. But in recognition of the style that the soils of Roero tend to produce, particularly the sandier soils, an earlier maturing, if we were to compare it to, say, most Barolos, at least from the sturdier side of the appellation, not the Barolo town side, but places like Castiglione, Faletto, and so on, where you get much more tannic wines that take a lot longer to come around. You can get into Roero Rosso and start enjoying it relatively early, like this example here. So it's not ideal lighting for color evaluation, but you can see it's pretty pale. Pure red, hasn't moved into the garnet spectrum yet. And I particularly like that very open nip, very fine grain tannin. Call them sandy, if you will. Kind of makes sense. Born on sandy soils. sandy textured tannas. And then I've got the Riserva from the MGA Renesio with this is actually a 2019 vintage, just to get an idea of the ageability now, 6 years in. It's in perfect drinking shape, I have to say. Still very pretty, still loads of fruit there, all kinds of strawberry, little smoky strawberry, and even a little bit of hibiscus, the floral side of Nebbiolo, and then a little bit more structure. The other thing I really like a lot is I call it the sapidity. You know, that salinity is the new minerality, and wines from these fossil-rich, calcareous, limey sands tend to produce wines with this high degree of sapidity, that sort of succulent, saliva-inducing quality that makes you want to come back for another sip. I know it's almost like a little pinch of salt that makes you both thirsty and hungry. And wow, we got a nice plate of salumi here, a little prosciutto di Parma or San Daniele, or a little bresaola from Piedmont, or a little salsiccia di Bra. We would be having an excellent time. Last couple of little details to share with you here. I was mentioning the greater percentage of MGA mentions on Roero versions and Riserva versions. You can see from zero when they didn't exist, now up to somewhere between 30 and 45% of the total production it comes with an MGA designation, and I think we'll start to see more and more of those in the market. It makes sense if you want to premiumize your product, if you want to get really engaged consumers even more engaged. It's to give them a wine with greater specificity, and here 134 options available to producers. And that, my friends, is a little wrap up of the Roero region. I hope you learned something today. Hope you're encouraged to go and grab a bottle of Roero wherever it is you are, and give them a taste, both the Bianco and the Rosso versions. And do we have any questions? Looking at the chat. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to raising a glass of Roero with you. And thanks again to the Consorzio team in the background there. Francesca, thanks for taking time out today and ground control. And see you all on the next one.